We left off last video getting this simple loading screen in place. In this video, we're going to implement another network call to download the individual images of our appetizers. So back in Xcode, just to refresh real quick, if I go to my appetizer model, right, we have this image URL that is a string, right? So the data we get back from JSON has a URL attached to it, and that's what we're going to use to download this image. But the first thing we got to do is into our network manager, we have to create another network call similar to our get appetizers. Now, the concept for this network call is the same. However, we're going to handle it a bit differently. And the reason being is looking at the design, like we want to show a placeholder if something goes wrong with our network call or if there's no image, right? We don't want to pop up an alert to like bug our user every time like an image goes wrong, right? Because you see all the images on this screen, like you'd be popping up alerts. That's just so annoying. So our way of showing an alert when an image goes wrong is just showing the placeholder, right? Just kind of, it's almost like failing silently, except you have that placeholder. Anyway, we're just not bombarding them with alerts. So that's why this network call is going to be a little different, because this is our get appetizers network call, right? You see, we had to check for the error, check for the response, check for the data, because we wanted to give specific errors for each case. Well, in our network call to get the image, we're not worried about specific errors, so you're going to see this get simplified a bit. Okay, so let's write this. So I'm going to scroll down here, create a new function, func download image. I'll move this up a little bit, and we want this to be from URL string, right? Because we're going to pass in a string here. And the reason I like to be specific like this, like say, hey, it's a URL string, is to just differentiate between when I'm expecting a string or when I'm expecting, you know, like the URL object. So that's why I like to do that little tidbit there. So it's going to take in the URL string. Again, that's what I showed you. It's the URL attached to the appetizer. And we're going to have the completion handler completed, which is an @escaping closure. I don't know if you had a chance to go review that on my YouTube channel that I linked last time, but if not, you should definitely check that out. And then here's where it's a little different. I'm going to scroll up to compare, right? Last time at this part, we returned a result that either had an appetizer or an error. Remember, because we wanted to pass back the error. Well, like I said, I'm going to copy this for format purposes. So Command C, Command V. So, and this is just to also illustrate the differences here. So we don't need a result type because we don't care about the failure case. Remember, we're just using the placeholder. All we want to return is a UI image. And it's telling me it doesn't know what a UI image is because if I go up to the top, I have not imported UIKit. Side note, UIKit automatically imports Foundation, so you don't need both. Command B. So now I have UIKit. Now it knows what a UI image is. However, like we talked about, there could be an error case. So UI image could be nil. We're not always going to have a UI image. So let's make it an optional with the question mark. And then let's create our open and close brackets for the scope of our function. So again, that's our function signature. You know, we're going to do network manager.share.download image. We're going to pass in a URL string, and the completion handler is either going to give us a UI image or nil based on what happens in the network call. Now, one thing we're going to set up for our images is the cache, right? Like, we don't want to always download our images repeatedly as we're scrolling up and down the screen. So we want to put those in the cache for fast scrolling, and you know, we'll check to make sure it's not in the cache, then we'll download it. If it is in the cache, we'll just yank it out of the cache and then use that image without even bothering with the network call. So that's what we're going to set up now. So to do that, we need to set up our cache up here. So private let cache equal ns cache, and we got to use ns because cache is still pretty old school. So ns string. What we're basically putting in here is the key value pair that we expect in our cache. And I got to initialize that. So basically what this is saying is our identifier is going to be a string or an ns string, and at that identifier in the cache is going to be a UI image. So we're kind of telling our cache what to expect to store. Okay, so back in our download image network call, this is the first thing we want to check, right? Again, before we mess with making a network call, let's make sure it's not in the cache first. So we're going to set up a variable for a cache key, and this is just a quick way to reference it here. Remember, the key is this ns string right here. And the key we're going to use is the actual URL address because that's pretty unique, right? You want your keys to be unique. So that's going to equal an ns string from a Swift string down here, and that string is going to be from URL string. That's what we're passing in here. And you know what, that naming can be better. Quick tip here on like argument labels versus parameter labels. So I can say from URL string will be what shows up at the call site, and if I just do space here, URL string, that's what shows up within the scope here. So I don't have to say like from URL string everywhere. I can say something that makes a little more sense, you know, a little more readable. It's just URL string, not from URL string. Small minor detail, but it does help, especially when your scope is really long and you're using it, it just makes more sense. So here we have our cache key, which again is just the URL that is attached to our appetizer. That's a unique string to identify the image. So let's check our cache. So if let image equals cache.object for key, right? We're going to go, whatever object is at this key, and the key we created was cache key. So if we have an image, cool, we're going to call completed and pass in the image, right? We're going to fire off our completion handler because we have an image there, and then let's hit the old return, and we're done here. We're out of the function. We're not even going to mess with the network call. However, if we check the cache and we get a nil, it's going to continue on, and now is where we need to make the network call to download the image because we don't have it in the cache. So now is where we have to do a similar check, right? We want to make sure our URL is fine. So guard let URL equal URL string else and completed nil, and then we return. We're out of here. We're just going to show the placeholder images. Okay, that's the same URL check we did before. Now let's actually start creating our data task. This is where it gets a little different. But this first part's the same, so you know what? We're just going to do a copy and paste so I don't mess that up and type it. Like I said, I do the copy and paste on the same stuff quite often. What I mess up here? Guard let URL equals URL string else completed. Oh, we're not just checking against the string. We're checking against the URL initialization of the string. Remember, because when you initialize a URL object, it can return nil if the string is invalid. So yeah, forgot to do that part. We're not just checking the string. And then down here, I need a closing bracket to finish that off. Okay, cool. So we have the same setup that we did before. Remember, we get back data, response, and error. Well, remember, this is different. We don't care about the errors, right? We don't have to check all this. All we care about is, did we get back good data? So that severely limits our checks here. So I can do guard let data equals data. And then I can combine another one here to say let image equals UI image. If you're not familiar with this, I'll walk through it afterwards. We want to initialize the UI image from data, and then that's the data that we got. And then else, so if we don't get any of this, we're going to call completed nil, and then return. So what's going on here is I'm saying, hey, if I have good data, great. Now keep going. If I have data, let's try to initialize an image from that data. Now, when you initialize a UI image from data, that can also return nil. That's why we're unwrapping this. So either we have bad data or trying to create an image from that data. If that returns nil, we're going to call completed nil. If we got good data, we were able to create an image from that data, we're good to go. Let's keep moving. So now we have our image. So we want to do two things, right? We've downloaded the image, so let's put it in the cache so we don't have to download it again next time. And then let's call our completion handler with our image. Okay, so let's do that. So self.cache.set object for key, right? So now we're saying, hey, whatever's at this key, make this the object in the cache. So the object we want to set is the image that we just created from our data up here. And then the key, again, is cache key, which is essentially the URL string that we're passing in. So this line of code sets the item in the cache. Now we want to call completed with our image, not nil, right? And that's what's going on up here in our completion handler, right? It's passing back an optional image. Now we actually have the image, so we're good to go. This would be like the success case. And then the last piece, as always, the one that trips everybody up, task.resume. Did I mess up the scope again? Nope, I didn't. All right, so let's clean this up again. Do a command B to get rid of any warnings or errors or see if we messed anything up. Nope, I like 2 spaces, vertical spaces between my functions, just me. All right, so let me walk through this high level one more time before we wrap up this video so you understand the network call, right? We're calling download image. We're going to pass in a URL string, which is the URL attached to our appetizer view. This network call is going to return a closure that's going to either have a UI image or it's going to be nil, right? It's optional. We're going to return nil if things go bad. We're going to return the image if things go good, right? Now we want to set up our cache. And again, we did that up here with the cache. And you see the cache takes a key and then the object. It's key value pair. So the key is going to be a string, and we're going to use the unique URL for the image to be the key to identify it. So we create that cache key from that URL. And then here's we're checking our cache to see if we have that object before we download anything, right? So if we have the object, cool. Call completed, return the image, we're done. Good game, right? If we don't have the image in our cache, all right, now we got to download it. So now we check to make sure our URL is good, make sure nobody's given us any funky URLs. Cool, if the URL is good, now let's create our network call here. Remember, the network call returns data, response, or error. In this case, because we're just showing the placeholder if things go wrong, we don't care about the errors, so we don't have to do all these other checks we did before. We can just see if we got the good stuff, right? So guard let data equals data. Did we get good data? And then if we do have good data, cool. can we make an image out of that data? If we can't, completed nil, show the placeholder, we're done. If we can make an image out of that, cool, set that image into the cache so we don't have to download it again next time, and then call the completion handler to pass that image up as the success case. And then task.resume is what actually fires off the network call. So we're gonna stop here on this video just to set up that network call. But in the next video, we're gonna create our custom SwiftUI image that can download images remotely. So let's do that.